we're going to be doing real blended learning, the complex and making it truly effective. In this section, I am honored to introduce you to Clive Shepherd, Director of On Alignment Ltd. It provides expertise in all aspects online. Clive is a widely known author of many books, ebooks, and articles. He also contributes regularly to his own blog, Clive on Learning. Clive was recognized for his outstanding contribution to the training industry at the World of Learning Conference in 2004. With that being said, I'd like to hand it over to Clive right now.
I haven't done anything yet. I'm going to have to update that CV because 2004 is actually 10 years ago now, isn't it? So is it still an outstanding contribution? I don't know. Anyway, thanks everybody for holding on. You could have gone home early, couldn't you? You could have headed off into the rain and back home, but you decided to stay on, so I'm very privileged that you have decided to do that. And, I'm very excited. I know people say that, but I actually really am very excited to share with you where my thinking is currently around the subject of blended learning and how that fits with the hundreds and hundreds of learning professionals that I've talked to over the last 4 or 5 years about this subject, and who have all helped me really to evolve these ideas. So I'm going to try and share those with you today and present a vision of blended learning which is much more than the stereotypical a little bit of e-learning followed by the classroom type mix, and talk about a very different set of ideas around what blended learning is. But not because blended learning in itself is an important thing, but because I believe that by blending in various different ways, which I'm going to explore with you, it is actually possible to achieve what we've always wanted to achieve in terms of formal interventions inside organizations. And not just formal interventions, but if you like, the crossover into the informal learning that we've been talking about for many years, but have found very hard to implement. So I'm going to start by telling a story. Now, I'd like to think that this is a true story, but it's not. It's a sort of it's fictitious, but I think it could be. It's not far off something that could happen in my life even. And I want you to imagine that you've just come back from a long business trip, maybe the few days that you've been spending here, and you're getting a little bit of hassle at home about how your life is completely different from my life. We never see each other, and we never do anything together. Wouldn't it be nice if we both did something together as partners in whatever relationship you may be in? And your partner suggests, well, I've always wanted to learn ballroom dancing. You said, well, hang on a minute. I know we watch Strictly Come Dancing on the television, but I've never quite seen myself prancing around quite like those guys. And when I was younger, you wouldn't be seen dead, talking about ballroom dancing. But all right, okay, I feel really guilty about all my trips away and all my selfish projects and everything else. Let's have a look at it. So my partner is actually, already is a reasonable dancer. I'm pretty much a beginner. So all right, let's have a go at this. Let's go and learn ballroom dancing. So I don't know. A little bit of quick interaction. What would you do if you were in that situation? How would you learn ballroom dancing? What would be the first thing you'd do? Anybody? Attend a class. Anybody else?
Send a friend.
Sorry? What's that?
Send a friend.
Send a friend, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Find someone who knows about it.
Find someone who knows about it, yeah. Certainly, if you're a complete beginner at something, it's very unlikely you're going to just Google it and say, well, I can figure it out by watching YouTube. You're probably going to say, well, I need a bit of a more structured hand to help, a structured program with an experienced hand to help me through the process. So, okay, that's what happens. We take your advice. We're going to go to a class. So my partner and I, we go along to the ballroom dancing school, and we meet the teacher there, the ballroom dancing teacher, and she explores, what my wife knows about ballroom dancing, what experience she's got, what experience I've got, and talks about the various classes that they run for different types of dancing and at different levels. And there's a sort of bit of a negotiation really about what would be a good fit. And what do we do about the fact that I'm starting slightly lower level than my wife in that situation? But anyway, we negotiate something and we fix up to do a series of classes. And the teacher suggests there's a few things you could possibly read before you come along, or some videos you might want to watch, which might help you to get prepared for this. And so that's fine. By the way, this isn't a joke. It does sound like the longest joke that anyone's ever told. It isn't a joke. This is a story which I'm going to try and draw some lessons from. But I think it's almost like a mouth open. What's the punchline going to be? But there isn't a punchline. But the other thing is that the dance school sends us all their materials, which they give to people to help them prepare what sort of kit you need, and shoes and clothes, and how it all works. Anyway, that's fine. So we start the series of classes. Basically, that's an hour a week for over a period of a term, maybe 12, 13 weeks, which seems reasonable. And we go along to those classes, my wife and I, and typically what happens is there's a little bit of an introduction to a concept or an idea, a demonstration of some skills. And then basically for most of that hour, we spend dancing, practicing what it is that we've been suggested to do. Seems a reasonable thing to do, I'm sure. And on the other hand, this is a fairly contemporary dance school, so they also have videos and things that you can go back when you're back at home that you can watch, which will fill in some of the, I don't know, you might call it the theory, or but more, demonstrating different skills and some of the ideas about ballroom dancing, things that my wife and I can watch on when we get back on television or what have you. But basically what happens is in the days between the classroom sessions, in the dance school, we try and do a lot of dancing around the living room, and try and get as much practice as we can, so that next time we go along, we're building on the skills we had the previous week and making progress. And anyway, this goes on over a period of the whole term. By the end of that period, we're feeling that we're over the worst. We're feeling quite confident, and certainly really, really into the idea of dancing, that this isn't quite as ridiculous an idea as we thought, and actually we're probably getting to feel quite pleased with ourselves. But the formal program finishes, and basically we're on our own now, so we set off to sort of try and take advantage of all this. So we try and take part in as many opportunities to dance as we can in a proper setting. We maybe enter some junior competitions, so that we're with other beginners, so that we can test ourselves against other people. We probably pick out there are some things that we're really not very good at, and even though we've been through all the classes, there are some things we're still not very good at. So perhaps we could do with a little bit of extra coaching from the teacher. So we've built a good relationship with that teacher. Go back to the school and say, could you give us some extra coaching, maybe individually as well as a couple, because until we can iron out some of these little gaps in our skills, and that happens. But we also keep quite a good relationship with all the other people we met when we did the classes. So we meet up quite a lot, we share experiences, and generally help each other out and give each other encouragement. And life goes on from there, and that continues. It never really finishes, that you're always gradually, hoping to improve on your skills. That isn't such a far-fetched story, is it? It's not, it's conceivably quite likely to happen. But for me, it's an example of what I'd like to position as a skills journey, and which is one of the types of blends that I'd like to explore with you today. And skills are one of the things that, as in learning development, we're often responsible for developing in people. Whether it's skills in operating a forklift truck, or it's skills at flying a plane, or it's skills at negotiating with customers, or whatever it might be. Skills are one of those things which is, we're responsible for delivering within an organisation. So there might be something we can learn from the ballroom dancing experience. So let's try and analyse what happened. Before I do that, I'd like to introduce you to somebody. Does anybody know who this is? Who is it? Pardon? No, not Dietrich. Edith Piaf. Yes, now Edith Piaf has only one relevance to this particular presentation. And she, of course, this is her famous phrase, I regret nothing. So I tried desperately to say, how can I link that to the presentation? Well, of course, if you follow Edith Piaf's model, which we'll see in a minute, Edith Piaf's model, we will have no regrets. It's a bit far-fetched, but I'm going to go with it. And that's because I discovered it was pure luck, that the sort of 4 phases that I saw in a typical blended solution spelled Piaf. Now that was just one of those magic bits of luck. So you can't waste that situation. So what are those four phases? First one is preparation. And in the ballroom dancing example, but in any other corporate example as well, what preparation is really all about is aligning the learner with the formal part of the intervention, the course, if you like. Making sure that the course is adapted properly to the learner and the learner is adapted properly to the course. So they have the proper expectations. They have, if they don't have the prerequisite skills or knowledge, that they would gather those in that preparation phase. If they were, say, anxious about the program, that we would deal with that. If they needed to familiarize themselves with co-learners, they would do that at that phase. It's an alignment of the supply and demand. In other words, what we're providing is essentially compatible, rather than just, square pegs in round holes and all that sort of stuff. That's an easy thing to understand. Then there is some form of input, and the inputs, I struggled really hard to find the right word here, but input, because there are very, very diverse forms of interventions that we might be responsible for. They might be very formal and involve classrooms or e-learning programs and things like that. But it might be, for example, an action learning set that's meeting over a period of time. So the meeting of an action learning set would be an input. If a program was entirely coaching-based, it could be that the coaching sessions were the input. But in many cases, it's going to be something more structured and formal than that. But I want to consider that the input is a bit like a catalyst, or it's a prompt for application, which is the next phase. In other words, what can we do with this, what we've acquired in this input? How can we adapt it to our real working environment, or in the case of the ballroom dancing, to actually our home environment? So application, which is often missed out in a corporate intervention. Application is taking the advantage of the input to apply it in some, if not absolutely authentic situation, some situation that's as close to the real world as you can get it. And then following it up. So here's our F in Piaf, is following it up by shifting from a formal situation in which you're you're facilitated and managed or instructed or whatever it might be, into a situation where you take the initiative as the learner and you take it forward into everyday life. So it goes from courses to resources. Let's just map out this what we've just talked about with the ballroom dancing into that model and see what actually happens. So there are the 4 phases. So in the preparation phase, we had a discussion with the dance teacher. We had some information about the course to review. We did some background reading. In the input phase, we had the group classes. We had some videos to watch independently, if you remember. The application, we did lots of practice at home. Nothing, it's a nice, simple thing to do. Try it out, see how it goes. And then with a follow-up, but importantly, if you can see that white loop there, that's a looping structure. So you're going from input to application, input, application, input, application, because every week you're getting another bit of input and another opportunity to apply. And that's typically going to be much more productive in a skills building situation than a great long input phase followed by a great long application phase, because there's only so much you can retain before you have to actually do something with things. And anyway, there's lots of evidence to say that distributed practice is more powerful than massed practice. And then the follow-up phase, if you remember, involved a number of different things: individual coaching, dancing for fun and competitively, sharing experiences with other couples from the course. So if you like, even though that was a very informal blend that I was talking about, it followed through, right through, and it was, if you like, what I would call an end-to-end solution. So when I'm talking about more than blended learning, I'm talking about more than the input, more than blending the input so that you just have, different forms of input in one blend. But you've actually got an end-to-end application that moves from the course to the resource, as we'll see, and from formal to informal. So there's, the first part of it is very much to do with the course. The second part of it is to do with resources. But actually it's a slightly deceiving slide, because actually the resources arrow is much longer than the courses arrow, because it extends on into the future as long as you continue dancing. And the problem with many blends, or many interventions generally, is that we ignore the resources phase. Resources is not just about content, it's about interaction with other people. They are resources as much as content. So that's an important lesson there. Though some of you may have come across, it's a very, very long-standing play on words, really, about in a skills building situation, about moving from unconscious incompetence through to unconscious competence. Anybody here come across this model? It's been around quite a long time. Now, I've always been very suspicious of it, thinking that it's too good to be true. The play on words is too good to be true. But actually, it does fit quite nicely with skill building situations. So let's try and map that here. So we started off, when we started thinking about, my wife and I started thinking about ballroom dancing. We started off in a situation of unconscious incompetence. We didn't know that we were hopeless at this. We thought it's probably quite easy. It looks easy on the telly. After all, those celebrities can do it in just a few weeks. I'm sure we can do it. That's a sort of comfortable starting point. But then as you start to get into the input phase, beyond that, you're actually beginning to feel a bit uncomfortable, because now you realize that you're absolutely hopeless at this, and that it actually is it's always disappointing when you learn that skills require lots of practice. Buying a new piano is when it's delivered and you unpack it and put it, in the room, it's such a wonderful experience until you start playing it. If you haven't had any training at all and realize that you can't make any sound on it that anybody would want to listen to. It's so disappointing when you realize I've actually got to do hundreds, if not thousands of hours of practice. But nevertheless, it's a reality of life. And that you will always achieve the skill if you put the time in. But of course, over time, lots of lessons, 13 lessons over a term, we build to a phase of conscious competence. And really, you wouldn't expect the course phase to end until we've reached a situation of conscious competence. You wouldn't expect people to back away until you're feeling confident that you can move on your own. And far too often in a corporate intervention, you get just enough practice to get to the unconscious, to conscious incompetence phase, but you're left in a state really of being worse off than you were when you started, as I'll show you in a minute. And then over time, you move into unconscious competence. So that's just mapping a very familiar model against those 4 phases, and why those 4 phases are so important. Okay, now another thing that I'd like to highlight for you is that there's at least 4 different ways in which you can blend in a blender solution. And each of those can add something important to either the effectiveness or the efficiency of the blend. So one of the things we can do is blend by what I call social context. Now that sounds very theoretical, but it isn't. By social context, all I mean is, who are you learning with? Are you learning on your own? Or in the case of this example, it was, my wife and I, they would be the individual learner. Are you learning on your own? Are you learning one-to-one with one other person, usually a coach or a teacher or instructor, or are you learning in a group? And the context in which you learn socially has a big impact on the effectiveness of the solution. Because at different times you need different types of support. Sometimes it's actually great not to have anybody getting in the way of your learning, to actually have space to reflect, space to do things on your own. But not for too long. Most of us don't want to learn individually as a sort of dominant context, social context, but it is a very useful part of the blend. It's nice to have space, time to think, time to reflect, time to plan. It's also really important because we are social animals. It's really important we have the opportunity to interact with other learners, and in some situations more than others. But learning in those ballroom dancing classes with other people proved really beneficial because we can benchmark our progress against those other people. We can give each other encouragement. We can give each other a bit of peer pressure. And later on, that becomes a social network that we can employ to further our learning in an ongoing basis. And sometimes that's not right either, because a group setting is full of potential for humiliation and embarrassment, as you can imagine. And have all experienced, I'm sure, doing role plays in classrooms. But there are situations where you actually want a one-to-one, highly individualized contact with a coach or an instructor or somebody else, a subject expert, who can give you individual feedback, can answer your particular questions and everything else in a private setting. So all of these contexts are important. Now, they're not going to be equal in ratio in a blend, but and every blend is going to be different, but getting the right balance of those social contexts is really important. So let's try and apply that to this blend here. So first of all, which bits of this blend are individual? They're shown in red here. Quite a few elements of that blend are things we do on our own. Reviewing information, background reading, watching videos, practicing at home. Some of those are one-to-one, discussion with the dance teacher at the beginning, the individual coaching later on. And some of them are group, like the group classes and the sharing experiences with other couples. It sort of naturally feels better as a blend because we're actually providing different social contexts for learning at different points. It seems to feel better. If you concentrate too much on one at the expense of the other, it falls down, which is one of the problems with all classroom training, is that it's all group. Groups are great, but we don't want groups all the time. And it's the same problem if you're doing e-learning all the time. It's all individual. That's every bit as unsatisfactory as it doesn't balance properly. It's a bit like a balanced meal, if you like. So another thing that happened in the ballroom dancing example is that we blended by the teaching or learning strategy. In other words, the type of learning was different in different situations. And I'd like to explore with you 4 different alternative ways, strategies that you could employ for teaching or learning. And one of those is just simple exposition. In other words, you pass over information. Read this book, watch this video, listen to my presentation. Well, this is exposition now, for example. It's something which is a valid strategy. You can't rely on it because it's not an interactive strategy, but it can be useful in certain situations. I mean, you obviously thought so, otherwise you wouldn't have come to this conference and submitted yourself to lots of exposition. But it's not enough, but it's useful at stages. At other stages, you want an instructional approach. Instructional approach is about having very specific objectives, an assessment of at the end of that, and a process which is carefully managed to get every learner from that starting point to the end. And instruction can take place in a classroom, it can take place in e-learning, it can take place one-to-one, sitting next to Nelly or whatever it is. But instruction is something that you do when you've got very sort of well-defined tasks to teach people, or knowledge that's very black and white to pass over. And instruction is very useful for that. But instruction is not good for everything. It's quite good for the ballroom dancing, but as you'll see in a minute when I'm going to give you a second example, it wouldn't work for that. Guided discovery, as we'll see in a minute, is much more important when things are not black and white, when you're trying to convey ideas, influence attitudes, or you're trying to convey or provide insights into big ideas. I suppose it's what we're doing now, really, trying to convey big ideas. And exploration, the 4th strategy, is essentially turning it over to the learner and saying this is a pull situation where you pull what you want from different resources rather than pushing them at you. So let's see how those were applied here. So, for example, how did we use exposition? Well, it's mainly at the beginning, just for conveying information about the course. How did we use instruction? Well, the main body of the classes that we went to were instruction. with practice and feedback and so on. There was a little bit of guided discovery in the coaching relationship that we built up later, in the sense that it's not a sort of structured curriculum, it's more like creating opportunities to learn and then reflecting on them. And then there was what you would regard as exploration, which is essentially go and find resources and explore them on your own initiative. So that also there's an element of balance. It's not about the fact that you need to have all of them in a blend. It's about the fact that you need to be considering them for each element of your blend. Does it make sense to use exposition? Does it make sense to be doing instruction? And I think that it's one of those considerations that could make or break the effectiveness of it. Okay, let's imagine then that the ballroom dancing course was a corporate intervention. In other words, your employer decided to run an intervention on ballroom dancing. What would it look like? So, preparation, joining instructions. Input, 2-day dance workshop. There'd be 1.5 days of theory. Basically, we would be looking at the history of dance, the alternative forms of dance, the laws about dance, and all the things one mustn't do for health and safety reasons. On the last afternoon of the second day, there would be a ballroom dancing practice session. What would happen is that each couple would, in front of everybody else, go up and do a dance, and then everybody would give them feedback. And then, having sat through that torture, you'd all go home, and that would be the end of the session. That's the corporate ballroom dancing workshop. Let's just see what the problem is with that. First of all, is there an application phase? Well, it's up to you. If you would do that, you might get some printed handouts for reference if you're lucky. Okay, that's the corporate version. It's almost ridiculous, isn't it? But is it actually that far from what often happens? So let's map that against the unconscious competence model. First of all, we start with the situation of unconscious incompetence again. We go along to the dance workshop. We have one practice, and we discover that we're hopeless, which is what's bound to happen in the very first opportunity. Not only that, but we've been shown to be hopeless in front of everybody else, so we're now completely humiliated. So we're now in a much worse situation than where we started. So in other words, the workshop has taken us back considerably. Well, it's scared us off ballroom dancing forever, and that is the end of we never get to the other two situations. That's the horror story of many corporate interventions, I feel. Anyway, enough about skills. A lot of what people have to train is not about skills, it's about ideas. So I'm going to move on to show you a very different type of blend. And I'm going to call this the ideas adventure. You might say, well, we've done skills, why aren't we doing knowledge? Well, there's a good reason. And that's because in most cases, knowledge is a very subsidiary objective in learning and development at work. It's sometimes an underpinning of the skills. It's sometimes underpinning of other things, but it's very rarely the end in itself. The ideas are often the main objective of our intervention. So let's take some examples. Teaching project management. Project management is about ideas about managing projects. Leadership, we're going to look at leadership in a minute. Let's look at things like teaching people about diversity and inclusion. Teaching people about learning design. This is about ideas. It's about ideas that people need to buy into. It's about hearts and minds. It's about, it's not about telling people what those ideas are. It's about people feeling that they've come to those ideas themselves and that they feel committed to them so much that they'll actually apply them in their job. It's very easy to create a piece of e-learning that says you shouldn't start a meeting without an objective. And you read that and you say, well, fine. And you do a little quiz and it says, should you start a meeting with an objective? And you say, yes, and that's right, and you feel that's absolutely fine. Does that mean you're going to start a meeting with an objective? I don't think so. It's not that simple. Otherwise, we could just tell people, stop smoking, and they would stop smoking, but because they don't. Because they haven't bought into that idea themselves. It's just you telling them. And I think there's a huge number of training programs that we have to put in place in a work context, which are actually about ideas. So we need a model, we need a way of looking at the blend from an ideas perspective. So I'm going to go through a whole blend for you, looking at a leadership program. Now this is not an ideal leadership program. You know, we would all have a different view of that, but it's constructed in a way that I can show you how it might fit together in a blend and see what you think. So this is Act 2. So let's imagine that this was the brief. Okay? What we need, as it says there, middle managers who can do blah, blah, blah. It's a bit bullshit bingo, this, unfortunately. This, but it's sort of brief you're likely to get. Okay? That's sort of like what we're trying to achieve. So we need, we can't design a blend without information. It's absolutely critical that we start to piece together the information which is going to inform what should go in the blend. So let's imagine that we've done that. So the way I do this, and I found this to be incredibly helpful, is to use the concept of the 3 Ls. Actually, Phil Green, who's my colleague, it's actually his idea, the 3 Ls. So well done, Phil. But the idea of the 3 Ls is this, that we need to know about the learning, the learners, and the logistics. So I'm going to give you some information about all of these things. So what's the learning objectives we need to know about? We need to give people insights into the dynamics of effective leadership, increased awareness of their own leadership abilities, skills in interacting with individuals and groups in a wide variety of situations, confidence to apply new leadership thinking to their work. This is that's our requirement that we're looking at. That's our end goal. What do we need to know about the learners? Well, here's some information about the learners. This is the sort of thing we want to know. We don't need to study this now, we haven't got time, but you can imagine this is the information you went out and you gathered. But we also need to know about what constraints we're working under. Well, we've got 150 people, we've got to try and get the program done in 24 months, we've got various senior management commitment to it and so on. As I say, we haven't got time to study this in great detail, but imagine this is the data that you've gathered. So the idea then is to respond to that in a way that really does achieve those objectives for that audience. And that is not going to occur from a simple event-based intervention. It's bound to require a journey, just like skills required. So this is an adventure in terms of exploring new ideas. So let's look at that. What could happen in the preparation phase? Well, again, this is just examples. We don't need to worry about whether you agree with the examples. Let's just look at the sort of things we could do. We could do a 360-degree survey, do it online. We could do goal setting with your manager in any way that's practical. We could do some background reading about leadership, perhaps an e-book or a print-based book. We could make contact with the rest of the people who are going to be going through the program with you. We could do through a virtual learning environment. So this would be a typical preparation for an ideas adventure. You could do different things, of course. Something else is happening now. We've talked about blending social context. We've talked about blending strategies. We're starting to blend media. In other words, not what we do, but how we do it. So if we look at this now, we've got alternative delivery channels. We've got face-to-face as a potential channel. We've got what I call offline media as a potential channel. An example of offline media would be a book or a CD or a podcast or a downloadable PDF or something like that. It could be online media that we're using. So what we're doing is looking at each of those ingredients in the preparation phase and saying, what's the most efficient way of delivering that element? We've already, if you like, decided that what we need to do in terms of social context and strategy, we know what's going to be effective. Now, what's going to be the most efficient and flexible way of delivering it? So have we got any face-to-face there? Yeah, well, goal setting with your manager could probably be done that way. Anything offline, print or an e-book. Have we got anything online? Yes, we're going to do we've got the survey and what have you. So the issue about technology is purely a question of what's efficient and flexible. We're not getting hung up on technology. Technology is not driving this blend. It's just a way of implementing it efficiently. All the big blended decisions about effectiveness came earlier. Let's go into the next phase of the ideas adventure, the input, which is going to, again, loop around with application. What sort of things could we do? I'm actually going to suggest somebody who's been associated with e-learning since 1980, I hesitate to remind people, that I still am a very big believer in doing things face-to-face in the right situation. Why would we do that? Well, because sometimes you want something which is more special than you can accomplish in a virtual classroom or in online media. I want you to think of an analogy. Think about what percentage of the music that you listen to do you listen to in a concert hall or in a club as opposed to on an iPod or something? What percentage, anybody? Small? Whatever. Quite small. Unless you're a student or something and you're going out every night or something. What percentage of the drama that you watch is in a theatre as opposed to at the cinema or on a DVD? Quite small. What percentage of the sport that you watch is in a stadium as opposed to on TV? You may not be interested in sport, but yeah, quite small. Yeah? There's always exceptions. And I think that if I was, on the other hand, to say, what are some of the best experiences of your nights out or days out that you've ever had in your life, many of you would talk about, oh, I was at the World Cup final, or I saw this band play at Wembley, or I went to see this musical, on Broadway or something like that. These are often life-changing experiences. They're things you're never going to forget. So there obviously is something about being in the same place as other people in a face-to-face environment that has a certain magic. It's very hard to define. We don't want to lose that. I mean, you have decided to come here, haven't you? You could have watched the videos, couldn't you? It's the same thing. But you decided you wanted to experience something with other people in real time. It's important. Okay, let's look at some of the other things that could happen in that input phase. Some of it's face-to-face, some of it's online. What about another aspect fourth aspect about blending? We talked about blending by social context, we talked about blending by strategy, we talked about blending by whether it's face-to-face or online. There is another element about media I want to bring up, which is it live or is it essentially at your own pace? In e-learning, we always use the term synchronous or asynchronous, and I think that, which is a sort of bizarrely technical way of describing, is it something that happens where everyone's coordinated their diary, like a phone call or a meeting or an interview, or is it something which you do in your own time and you manage that time? So the fourth thing we need to consider is there the right balance between same time or synchronous activities and own time or asynchronous activities? Again, actually, it's Phil who I borrowed these terms from. You don't mind, Phil, do you? Just in case you're consulting your lawyer at this point. I think that there's quite a debate about what is the importance of, why do we have same-time activities? Why do we have activities like this rather than watch the video? Why do we telephone people rather than text them? Why do we send them sometimes we'll go around and see them, sometimes we'll send them an email. There's a qualitative difference. They're both very beneficial, but a blend which doesn't have any live component somehow seems to be lacking. That live component may be a phone call, that live component might be a virtual classroom, not necessarily face-to-face, but there's another fourth element of balancing, which is about, is there enough synchronous activity when you're doing things at the same time as other people? So there are four elements of blending that I've introduced to you. Let's just tie this up and sort of pull this to a conclusion. Let's just see how this works out. The face-to-face workshops are synchronous, the individual reading is asynchronous. And let's explore into application. What sort of things could we do? We could have individual and group assignments, which they submit through the VLE. Review sessions could be done online. Individual reflection. We could have that they complete a blog over the period of the program on the virtual learning environment. Some of that is same time. Some of that is own time. Again, it's got that balance. But again, we're concentrating on application. We've done an input. We must follow that through with application. And then we must have that follow-up phase, the fourth element of PIAF, the follow-up phase. And what could we do there? We could come back and do our 360-degree survey again. We could have review sessions with your manager. And we could have a final assessment based on demonstrated competence. Now, I'm going to just very quickly talk about that because it's something that, as Phil will know, that we're implementing with one of our clients at the moment is a whole academy on the BATE where every course in this academy, the only way you can complete it is by your manager actually signing off that you've demonstrated competence on the job. There's absolutely no way you can gain a certificate through going through the course itself. There's absolutely nothing you can gain. It's a very, very different way of looking at completion of a corporate intervention. And it's messy and it's a cultural shift, but it's a complete step change in how people conceive of what the program's all about. It's a journey in which the aim is to reach a certain level of competence. It's not a journey where you're going to be able to pass quizzes or do essays or complete an assignment but never apply what you learn to the job. You've got to actually demonstrate it on the job. So, let's just pull this all together. What do I mean by more than blended learning? Well, I mean that it's more than just that input phase. It's end-to-end. It's from the start, the preparation phase, where you're aligning the learner and the learning intervention. It's more. It goes on from input to applying it to the job and giving lots of opportunities to practice. And it follows through, so it switches from the formal to the informal, from courses to resources, so that you continue to get support as your journey continues, support through other people, support through content, or whatever it might be. It's a crossing of all the boundaries. It's a blending in, if you excuse the pun, of all of these different elements, and I think that's very important. What else is it? It's a more than blended learning means it's more than just mixing media, mixing face-to-face and online. It's about using the right social context at the right point so that people get the support they need when they need it, but they don't have people around them when they don't want them around them. It's about mixing the strategies so that at each stage in the intervention, you achieve what you want to achieve with no compromise, but you're not wasting any time. And it's also about what media you use. It does matter whether you're face-to-face or online. It does matter whether you're live or you're asynchronous, because that affects the flexibility of the solution, the cost savings you're going to make from the solution as well. But the key thing is that you're never compromising effectiveness. Effectiveness is something which is absolutely a given. And then having achieved effectiveness, you're looking at, can you deliver that effective solution in the most economical, flexible way possible? And that will undoubtedly involve some use of technology, which of course is the reason we're all here. But it's done in an analytical way, and technology is not driving the solution. Technology is just an enabler, only one of the elements that you're thinking of blending. The other thing is it's more than blended learning, because you can use exactly the same form of analysis for any learning, designing any learning intervention. This isn't just about designing blends, it's about designing any learning intervention. You can follow exactly the same process. But if you actually apply the sort of PAF idea that you follow through from end to end, you're probably going to end up with a blend, however simple. So that's, I think, what I'd like to finish with now, and put time to move over to a few questions, in that it's a lot more than what you might have thought blended learning was, and probably, hopefully, a bit more interesting than it could have been if we just talked about combining e-learning with the classroom.
Thank you, Clive. It appears to me. Thank you. It was kind of scary seeing that induction scenario there, because I think we can all relate to experiencing that and seeing that it's the application and follow-up that we tend to leave to the wayside. That usually requires a little more time, investment by the stakeholders, as well as the sales delivery or learning and development group.
Yeah.
How do you sell that? If you're a member of a learning and development group, how do you not only sell it to the stakeholders, but also to your team that we need to invest this amount of time?
Well, this is, the ideas I've been talking about are an ideas adventure in their own right. So you have to apply the same blend, if you like, to the process of selling this in. And until people really feel that it's the right thing to do, you can't proceed with it. So, I mean, you've got, as you say, there's a change management process. But I would say that it's much better to do, 10% of the courses you're doing now properly than 100% poorly. And I think that if that means more work on the 10%, but you have to cut some other things out, then fair enough.
Okay, focus.
Focus.
Questions from the group here. We have a woman here ready to give you a microphone so we can capture that. Any questions?
There's a question over here.
I was a little. Am I on here? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, there I have it. I was a little bit concerned about your characterization of synchronous versus asynchronous as possibly being a bit too nerdy. I wonder, and what I also didn't see was this notion about the shared experience by being co-located in person
Yeah.
that you get. You gave some examples.
Yeah.
But I've had experiences like watching opera on the large screen at Pac Bell Park.
Yeah.
So we're essentially a big crowd of people watching
Yeah.
TV. But it's not quite the same because there's
a
a shared
hybrid.
experience of all of us in the stadium, and we're watching something that's happening in real time.
Yeah, it's a sort of hybrid really in that it is a synchronous experience, which is important because you're experiencing the event at the same time. You haven't got the thrill of saying you're watching within a few feet of the performers, but you're still getting a very significant experience. I think there is a powerful argument for synchronous elements in blends because of the shared experience, which is not necessarily the same thing as being face-to-face. The arguments are not identical, but a face-to-face synchronous experience is probably the most powerful, but what you described is certainly still powerful. That would be my view anyway.
Next.
Okay, demonstrated competence, is that based on a set of defined behaviours?
Yeah, absolutely, it has to be.
Okay.
And that should be driving the whole design. So the design starts by saying what do people need to be doing differently or what they're not doing now in order for us to achieve the goal of the program, and then following that right through to actually seeing whether that behaviour is being exhibited in the workplace. The way we do it on the particular program I was talking about is that at some point after the formal part of the program, the learner asserts to their manager, look, I think that I've got enough evidence to demonstrate that I have been applying these behaviours, and they, it's up to the manager then to make a judgment on whether they feel that that's true or not.
So the manager observes the behaviours in
Yeah,
action.
or if they can't observe it personally, obviously you hope they will be able to. But if they can't, then it's up to the learner to provide evidence to support it. And if there's a gap, then the journey continues. Coaching and other inputs need to be put in place so that eventually everybody achieves that level of competence. It's the thing about you can't, these things are going to have uncertain finishes because some people are going to take longer than others to achieve that same that same criterion.
I have a follow-up question to that. The observation of these competencies, does it become impacted if you're doing it virtually? Say the manager is in a different location than face-to-face?
It's harder, yes, but it's also very common. I think that's why you have to give suggestions to the learners on what sort of evidence can they find which will satisfy the manager. It might be that it is a 360-degree survey. It might be, if you're learning presentation skills, you might take a video of your presentation. It's a bit like any sort of portfolio type exercise, is that you put together whatever is necessary to try and convince your manager that you've reached that point. Or it might be even that the facilitator of the formal element has a role too in saying, I reckon that person's got it.
Perfect. Next question.
Just on the role of managers, I'm following almost exactly the same model, so right at the front.
So I'm not, I was wondering where you were.
Yeah. One of the challenges I've got is having to upskill the managers to manage that effective work-based learning.
Yeah.
Is that something you're factoring in as well?
Absolutely. I think to do all the things we talked about today, and I think most of us would agree, most of it is sort of stuff we'd probably like to do in one way or another, is that not to underestimate the change that you're envisaging, and you might take it in small steps, and you clearly need to demonstrate some really, take one program and demonstrate for that program, that you get, that you're achieving everything you want through that program, and then that can be used as a case study. But yes, you need to spend a lot of time with managers. I've talking to one facilitator last week who's going to actually Skype call every manager of every student that's joining their program to talk about the importance of their role in supporting the learner throughout the program, and that often that's at very least giving them the time, because often the online elements of programs, people think, oh, well, you can do that the weekend, and that isn't always possible. With the particular client we're talking about, people don't have computers at home, so it's not, that's not practical. Phil?
Clive, you always knew I'd try and bowl you a curveball at the end of the day. But thinking about that Tuckman model of conscious incompetence, et cetera, and the preparation stage, is it true, or am I confused if I'm thinking that sometimes it's about taking somebody from, I didn't know I had to learn something here, I didn't know that there was something I didn't know, to now I know there is something that I don't know, and so I'm motivated to learn. But is it sometimes the other way around, that it starts with, I'm very clear that I need and want to learn something, so is the preparation different?
Absolutely, because I think if somebody's already, if you like, motivated and interested, then you say, hurrah, it's a much easier process that we don't have to invest a lot of energy engaging the learner and inspiring them. Because the course phase, the formal bit, is about two things. It's about inspiration, to make you love the idea of ballroom dancing or love the idea of leadership, and then to give you enough confidence that you can continue the journey on your own initiative. But if you don't have to do the inspiration because someone's coming to you already says, I'm completely and utterly, obsessed with ballroom dancing, I can't wait to start, it makes the teacher's job a lot easier. So the preparation phase becomes a lot easier. But I think often we do have to convince people. In fact, if you look to the profile, if you have a chance to look back at the slides about the leadership course, when we did this isn't the real course, but on the slides, actually there was quite a lot of resistance to this program, and there was quite a lot. There were some people who clearly were going to be difficult. The idea in that preparation phase is to try and align the learners with the course so that they're all, round pegs in round holes.
Great. Any other questions?
Down the front.
I was going to say, you've got the other group of unconscious incompetents who think they can dance and who can't, and that's also a problem.
Yes, absolutely, yes. And they'll get to that conscious incompetence phase soon enough. And that's where you need really good facilitation to help people through that shock of realizing that they're not as good as they thought they are, and it's a long journey ahead. As a lady with a red scarf.
How long should the preparation phase last compared to the course phase?
Well, I have no answer to that because I don't know. All I know is that we probably underestimate it. And that, for example, in some cases, if there's a significant online element, it's very beneficial to give people some sort of orientation to how to learn in an online environment. For some people, it's a completely strange experience. So that might actually be part of the preparation phase. It might be that people have never had to learn on their own initiative. They've always only learned at the direction of a teacher. So that might be something that needs to be built in. It might merge into the input phase. It doesn't. The phases themselves don't matter. The point is, are you achieving that functionality? And I think that we probably underestimate the preparation phase. Certainly, that's my experience. We don't do enough.
Building on the comment that my friend Claire Lyne said at the front, that sometimes you take people from a state of unconscious incompetence where they don't realise that actually ballroom dancing is not for them and it's never going to be for them. Is one of the consequences of preparation sometimes protecting people from going down a long, elaborate, expensive course?
If they're a square peg, and they're never going to go in that round hole, you can't shave off the edges, then yes, absolutely, I think you've got to admit that.
Thanks, Clive. That's very interesting. I used to run a blended learning programme for trainers in the BBC.
Oh, excellent.
And actually, one of their issues was we're all face-to-face trainers, but actually you're telling us to take on board e-learning and stuff. So
Yeah.
part of that training was about getting them to think about how that might all fit together.
Yeah.
But actually, we kick-started them with a session on learning theories.
Yeah.
So we were getting them to think about behavioural learning, experiential
Yes.
learning, more cognitive, etc. And that seemed to be quite an interesting way of thinking about it. So, for example, in the BBC, if you're learning to be to film with cameras and things, a lot of it has to be experiential. You just have to do it and
Absolutely.
then, explore it. Is that something you've...
Yeah, I
approached?
mean, I've been talking more about formal interventions, but obviously there's a broader picture of learning at work. Not all learning is about formal interventions, and there's the broader picture of architecting the big picture, the experiential side of it, and the on-demand learning and so on. But where you do have a formal intervention to do, and that's something we are often responsible for doing, then even within that, there are so many nuances which could make a much more effective intervention than we're used to doing. And they may have to take on different roles throughout that process. Sometimes there'll be a subject expert, sometimes there'll be an instructor, sometimes there'll be a facilitator, and sometimes they're a curator, if you like, or a coach. So, they need to adapt to different roles. I think there is a little difficulty here, which I'd like to just share. It came out of the survey which the Oxford group did last year for Kineo on blended learning, which was that one of the problems is that if we have teams of people who are like, this is the e-learning team and this is the face-to-face delivery team, we're often actually short of people with the experience to design blended solutions. And in fact, that is a critical skills shortage at the moment, is people who feel comfortable with bringing it all together and making those decisions about social contexts and strategies and synchronous or asynchronous or online or face-to-face, making those judgments. And often it's very difficult if people have very definite interests in one or other of those different approaches. It's very difficult to bring them to bring that together and to get those designs
Clive, that's
done.
a great comment. Our last session, if you want to see it, it'll be on video. Videos for Learning. Barbara Thompson from BP actually referenced, she hit a roadblock in regard to doing her diversity training, looked up Clive Shepherd's, this model right here. So if you want to see a real applied case study of exactly what was described here, especially that last part, designing, creating, and putting up there, she references your model, and she states it on the video. So I think that's a great follow-up to this presentation here. One or two last questions, if we have them out here.
Hi. First
Hi.
of all, thank you. It's a fantastic presentation. Really
Thank you.
enjoyed it. I just wanted a quick question about asynchronous and synchronous
Yes.
learning with virtual teams.
Yes.
Because time difference, global teams,
Yeah.
trying to get people, in the same space in time is very tricky. But absolutely agree that there is much to be gained by
Yeah.
getting everybody at least online in a virtual classroom at the same time. Any practical tips on?
Well, I think you've just got to, don't give up and think that it's always more convenient not to have synchronous elements, because it means people have got to coordinate their diaries, put the time aside. Somebody in the USA has to get up at 4 a.m. Somebody in Hong Kong, it's 8 at night. All right, you're right. You might run more than one session and so on. But I've with one of my clients, I've been doing their entire program is centered on synchronous events, which are virtual classrooms. Then they do asynchronous activities and assignments in between, and they're quite long sessions. They're 2-hour sessions. There are about 6 of them over about 3 or 4 months. But it works brilliantly. And they are from all over the world. They couldn't possibly ever run this program any other way. But without that synchronous element, what tends to happen is if everything is asynchronous, in other words, you do it in your own time, is that the deadlines become really hard to maintain. When you know that there's a synchronous event coming up on Monday, and if you haven't done your various, self-study or your group work or whatever it might be, there's that incentive is to get the work done before that session, and it acts as a sort of structure. And my experience is that on the whole, people really want a time frame and a structure. They don't want things to be too fluid.
So synchronicity is an imperative for learning?
Well, it's an imperative to getting over the motivational issues of asynchronous learning, which is always something you can postpone to tomorrow. But if you know that that a synchronous event gives you a milestone, and I think there are lots of reasons for doing things synchronously, but that's one that I think is critical.
Okay, last question before we break. There is one. Excellent. All right, well, thank you very much, Clive. Great stuff.